Welcome, folks, to another great webinar of creating a plan of action to optimize your network. This is our Wi-Fi Lifecycle webinar series, and I'm glad that you can actually join us today for February the 18th, or actually the 19th, because a few of our guests, which you'll find out in just a moment, are actually coming to us from the future, including my co-host today. And it just so happens that my co-host is actually, and if I can make sure that my co-host is actually none other than Grant Shelley. So I'm playing the host, and that's I am your host today, Stu Goomans, and I am joined by my sidekick today. He's going to be wearing the sidekick shirt, and I'm going to have to get him a sidekick shirt at some point. Is Grant, right, Grant? So Grant, you know what? We got an awesome webinar, and I really kind of thank you for joining it this such early morning for you. It's actually for you and our two guests. But why don't you kick off and introduce our guests for us? And I'll give you a little hint. They're both actually Ekahau masters. So Grant, why don't you take it away there?
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Stu. So yeah, we've sort of got the we've got the Aussies on the webinar this morning. So first up, we've got Aaron Scott, Ekahau Master and CWNE, an all-around great beard grower. And then we've also got Devaya Nalamakada, also an Ekahau Master and CWNE as well. And they're both going to help us step through some pretty awesome slides that we've got and some really good discussion points.
Absolutely. And just before we actually get in there, I think one of the things that we wanted to kind of, set the premise here is organizations regularly run wired, network and data center health checks, right? And we want to maintain, optimal efficiency. So why not Wi-Fi, right? So wireless networks are often overlooked. Because Wi-Fi should just work, right? Should be working fine. More often it's due to the lack of the accurate tool sets. Wi-Fi has become the electricity for business, because when work stops, we want to make sure that we're keeping the right amount of spectrum is on for that, more important than ever. And I think a little bit tongue-tied there this morning, so excuse me there, folks. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and we're going to launch a quick poll here. What events, lead you to, your most recent life cycle of network optimizations? So this is kind of cool. Now, normally we've got our cool Jeopardy music playing in the background here, and I'll get that going, but I don't think you can hear it. But go ahead and answer that poll question for us. Now, our participants can't answer this one, and I know I've got probably my thoughts on this. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I'd like to answer that.
But you can't.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. So let's, and we're just, I'll give another second there to get those folks to answer the poll. The poll, it should have come up for everybody can see everybody's answering it. Look at that. Come on, folks. You got, let's get a little bit more added in there. We'll give you another second or so. That Jeopardy music.
Interesting responses, right?
Well, it is, yeah. We're just seeing the kind of, and we'll launch the results there in just a second. So it looks like some of the folks are seeing the poll, but they're. We'll go ahead and end that there. That looks good. And you know what? Let's kind of look at that results quickly, right? So, what does that look like to you? I mean, that's in some interesting responses, wouldn't you think? So you've got a number of folks, troubleshooting issues, but a lot of them is the requirements has changed. That's interesting. So interesting responses. All right. So we talk about the next piece here, and so let's go in through that next slide. So why do we optimize, right? We need to kind of take a deep dive into why of optimization. So we know we had that great solid foundation. We did that validation. Now we got to make sure that it's working. I mean, Aaron, and what I kind of asking is like, what do we talk about when we talk about optimization considerations? What are we talking about there as we're kind of looking at our network after we've done that validation? It's been running for a little bit.
Yeah, you're looking at that state of the network where it's been deployed and you've obviously validated it. But things change, right? So it's not necessarily, nothing stays the same when you first got it. As James brought up in the chat, even something as simple as vendor best practices change. And so you kind of need to take stock of the network and say, can I make this better? It's not necessarily something's broken, but you're starting to look at how can I tweak the network and optimize it to make it better? Can it be better? It's just that's a bit term of just, can it be better? And there's lots of things to go and look at, right? So all those checking channels, do you have new neighbors that have popped up that are impacting on your network, that not necessarily causing any user impact, but it's making the network not as good as what it should be. So there's simple things, environmental changes. Is there a new wall that's gone up in an environment? There's lots of things to go and look at, but you're not necessarily going to see it as a user problem just yet. So there's lots of bits, power, firmware changes. Do you need to do an update? Is there an update that's going to change a feature, give users more stability, remove some bugs, those types of things?
And I guess, like, leaning back on the poll that you just ran before, Stu, I mean, you know, a lot of people were sort of saying, hey, the requirements have changed, right? And, you know, the top point we've got there, you know, has anything changed? And to Aaron's point, you know, it's Wi-Fi, there's going to be constant changes. And, you know, unlike a wired network where we need to plug something in and there's only so many ports that we can use, with Wi-Fi, the onboarding process is continual, right? So it's always this sort of shifting, you know, it's in a state of change pretty much all the time, right?
Absolutely. And I think, thanks, Grant. I think I would like to add another point. Even the first option, you know, you're optimizing because somebody complained that something is not working. And sometimes it so happens that even though, imagine a scenario where your network is designed 3 or 4 years back and things have changed, right? Which directly correlates to your third point. So when you're troubleshooting, you dig a lot of information, which enables you to optimize your network better for that particular day, and which will improve your performance for the coming months until you do it again. So it's a constant cycle.
Another way to look at that optimize is, think of the analogy of a car. You take your car in for a regular service to make sure it's all running well. You don't necessarily just take it. You don't take it to get looked at just because it's broken. Like the wheels have fallen off, the windows are smashed. That's not when you take it in. Normally you take it in because you're getting that regular service, getting that tune up to make sure it's running at its optimum. And that's kind of what optimize is for the optimized stays of the network life cycle.
Right. It's like a sports car, right? It's like it sometimes needs an odd tuning every once in a while, right? You don't want to just take it down the road and, you know, and you want to shift it into, you know, to that and into fourth and fifth gear, and you want to be able to know that it's going to be working the way it's intended.
Yeah, well, how many times do you take your car in for a service because it kind of feels like it needs a service? You know, it might be a little bit over that 5,000 or 10,000 kilometer mark, and you know, and it just feels better because it's had that oil change. So yeah,
right. Yeah,
I think that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I think that you know, that's a really good feedback, because you know, we want to make sure that, you know, we've checked a lot of these things, and when we're optimizing, I think that one thing that, you know, you guys touched on is firmware and whatnot is always, you know, before that troubleshooting comes in, and we'll talk about in a minute, but is that firmware. For me, the firmware piece on like the software, the revisions on the controllers or the access points, I think that's a really kind of key metric to watch, because vendors, you know, are always updating, and they're always making enhancements to their product line. And I guess it's always good to kind of, you know, if you're running those large enterprise networks, is to always keep an eye on that, because there could be a bug or something or an enhancement that, you know, you may not have seen yet, but you might, and that you might want to actually take a look at, right? So what do you guys think about that? I mean, the firmware piece, I think, is kind of important, because you know, we owe it to our manufacturers because they're great. You know, they're always you know, making enhancements, so to speak.
Yeah, well, you don't know what those enhancements are going to change on the client behavior side, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know, Dev, I know you work in a, you know, pretty live type of environment that probably sees this all the time. Can you talk to that a little bit, maybe, and what you've sort of seen?
Sure, Grant. Thank you. Yes, you're absolutely right. Things, no matter how good you are in designing your network, we always fall into that rabbit hole where, you have come across something new. You're like, I've done everything right. Why am I having this issue? And that directly correlates to this point where something very small has changed. For example, your your client services team who manage your laptops have brought in some new laptops, and they all behave differently. And I'm sure not many people go through this rigorous testing of seeing how these new fleet of laptops are behaving in your environment. Each one is different. Most of the places, they don't standardize the laptops because somebody wants a Windows-based Mac laptop, somebody wants a Mac. And the way they behave in that same place is entirely different. One nice example that I can share is recently received a complaint that a MacBook Pro was not connecting in a place where all other devices are connecting. And why that's happening, dig deeper, you see that the MacBook Pros, the receiver sensitivity is so different compared to the Windows laptop, or be it even your iPhone. It's almost around 6 to 10 dB off. So you need to factor in those offsets when you're doing your designs. And with these small driver changes, that keeps changing constantly. So it's very important that we test this seriously, test all the fleets that are operating on your Wi-Fi network, and make a note that you have tested this in these areas in a condition where you have, it's all green in your survey, but your laptops are not able to connect because of this exact reason. So it's a good exercise to document the different flavors that you have in your network, and then make a note how they're behaving in your cell edge. For example, negative 70 dBm, just go and see what's happening to those different laptops at the cell edge. At negative 67, what's happening? And go up to like negative 75 and see what's connecting, what's not. That'll give you a lot of answers.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's because every device sees the network, in its own way, right? And I think that's probably even a challenging thing for you, Dev, is that you probably have a standard set of devices that you have to rely on, and if the driver changes or you're introducing a new one, you're like you say, it's just like, wow, I got to make sure it works, right? And I think even just recently, I think was that Grant, even the new MacBook M1s, right? They're now supporting K and V, right? So they're actually supporting some of the roaming algorithms now, the new M1. So finally that's happening, right? So when we weren't doing that before, and I'm sure someone will correct me in the chat there somewhere, but I'm pretty sure that's what it was. That's recently happening. But yeah, you definitely are wanting to kind of make sure that your clients are doing well, and not to segue into something that that we've got on the screen here, but even in Ekahau Pro and on our survey apps, we can actually even simulate what mobile devices are looking at, how they see our network, right? So that's something that a tool you can use after you've taken some data from a device like the Sidekick. So not to kind of segue into that one, right, Grant, but it's just kind of like it shows you that there are some tool sets there that you could segue in. I always got to put a plug in there somewhere, right? So, but
yes. Yeah.
Aaron, any final thoughts that you want to see on this? Because I think that, I mean, you coming from the manufacturer point of view, right? You see kind of like the vendor side, and you see the kind of, you have to make, I mean, that's a challenging job. Your environment, you got to make sure that all devices work with your hardware, right? And that's got to be a huge challenge.
It is. And so when we design some networks for customers, it's all about compatibility. And so making sure everything works across, like that it was brought up in the chat earlier about vendor best practices change. And that's kind of where we can influence some of this. But a lot of vendor best practices are still focused on compatibility. When somebody turns on one of our access points, we need them to be able to connect. And so that's where if things are just deployed with out of the box settings, it's not necessarily going to be the best.
Mhm.
And so being that change from maximum compatibility to a fully optimized network will tweaks and tunes and playing with data rates and power settings and channel widths, all those types of things that how a vendor sets it up for maximum compatibility is not necessarily how you want to run your network. And so Optimize can help fix a lot of those issues.
Yeah, so and Dev, I know that you know, seeing from what you have to deal with on the client side, and we just kind of talked about it, but are you seeing you know, as when you're choosing a manufacturer, are you looking to that as well? Are you looking to make sure that, you know, your client compatibility, are you dealing with that as well?
Yes, of course. I mean, you know, when you're choosing a new vendor, you go through various levels of testing, including testing them on the fleet of devices that operate on your network, just to avoid things like, you know, you are doing a reactive job because it's behaving differently, but it's not perfect. You don't have a perfect day, because you know, most of these drivers and things can change the behavior so drastically, and they're very common. It does happen. And then when you go up and look up on the, you know, online, you look up on Google that, you know, why is this driver behaving differently, then you get a list of user experiences that are listed over there that you can correlate to. So yes, we do test the platforms that you're operating for the vendors that we choose.
Right. Yeah. And that's some good points. I mean, it's and just taking a look at a couple of the questions here, and it's you know, you see that, or it's in the chat there, is that there's definitely you know, folks talking about, you know, where they need to kind of, you know, looking at different types of generational hardware, right, and making sure that they've got the right type of generational hardware in there for APs, whether in their wave 1 AC or wave 2, and they're thinking of doing that optimizing. So it's not always about optimizing from the client point of view, or maybe the infrastructure point of view. It may not be just configuration, maybe it's the physical hardware, right? And so maybe there's things that we've got to look at, and the why. Grant, do you have any additional thoughts there on this?
No, I mean, look, I know I'm generalizing a little bit, but I often see, you know, so the optimization process as, you know, as a proactive approach in a lot of ways as well, right? You know, in a lot of cases, it may start at the survey side of things. At least that's what I've done in the past. And then, you know, a lot of that, you know, the health check and the SSIDs, you know, transmit power, a lot of that can be gleaned from doing, you know, like a, you know, Wi-Fi health check, Wi-Fi optimization survey, whatever you want to call it. And, you know, and then there can be a little bit of a deep dive, you know, if I'm a third-party contractor, you know, talking to the local IT department about, you know, firmware, what clients are being used, et cetera, et cetera. And then obviously environmental as well. You know, if you've got a day one survey, or maybe like a previous design, and we could compare it. You know, we've seen examples before of new walls that have been put up. I've seen, you know, new structures being put in place, you know, 6 months after the fact. They can, you know, cause issues with the Wi-Fi, right? So, yeah. I would probably also point to, there's a lot of questions coming through in the Q&A. So we might cherry pick a couple of them. Why don't we keep moving, Stu? And
Absolutely,
I'll see if I can pick a couple out, because there's some pretty lengthy ones in here.
Absolutely.
Which is really good.
So we talked about that optimization. We understand that, you know, why we have to do it, and, you know, why we should be doing some sort of optimization on our network, and what are the things that we should be looking for. So now that we've done that, we kind of want to look at, you know, that health check, right? We've gathered that data. And in a previous webinar that we were looking at, we did on our last webinar, we did a validation process, right? We did a checklist. And so as you learn from your ECSE training, you're going to learn that validation process, right? And it goes through very easily, and is a methodically method that you want to go and say, okay, I'm going to check for X, Y, and Z. I'm going to make sure that I've got those SSIDs broadcasting correctly on those APs. I'm going to analyze my data. I'm going to look at my SNR, look at all the cool things. And you've got that. And now you need to, based on a checklist like that, you can now formulate a remediation plan, right? So now that we know that we're going to go and take a quick look at our network and find out, is there anything happening? Let's prioritize some areas of concern, right? So we look at that, and you want to kind of figure out identify, what needs to be addressed, right? Is do we need to go on any mission critical areas? And like from the financial world, Dev, I'm going to lean on you here for a second, and just want to home in on that point there is, when you're creating that prioritizing area of concern, I'm sure that you have mission critical areas that are like, you could have market maker or trade desks, that need to be up continuously between a certain hours of the day, between 9 and 4. You may have some other mission criticals like bond traders or something like that. You need an area. I would assume that you have that type of mission critical areas where you have to wait, or you have to maybe say, hey, no, we need to fix something.
Absolutely. I think one of the examples was, we have come up with buildings which are, Wi-Fi only, and absolutely mission critical, because when you are either in a trade desk, or if you are even in a customer support role, each call is important, right? And when you are using devices purely on Wi-Fi as a medium and no wired, then it becomes, no room for error. So yes, it's very important that we see what devices are being used while handling this mission critical environments and offering mission critical services, and ensure that they are operating in an optimized environment to ensure that they have a good user experience.
Absolutely. Aaron, what do you see on if you see from on the corporate side? What do you see from the kind of corporate vendor side? Do you see kind of those mission critical type areas as well?
Oh, definitely. There's more and more networks these days that are 24/7. So whether it's something that I guess a lot of people don't see as mission critical, something like warehousing, those types of environments run 24/7, moving product in and out, and it's very difficult to get something like an outage window to fix those things in those types of environments. And so staying on top of those little issues is sometimes easier than waiting until things break, particularly in those sort of mission critical environments. So that proactive sort of approach in 24/7 environments is never a bad thing.
Right. Yeah. And I think even from speaking from experience on the healthcare side, right, is your hospital, you're trying to kind of make sure that you've, one of the things that I know folks like to do, and I used to do this as well, is ask questions, right? So ask questions to the staff, right? Because a lot of times folks may not place a ticket, right? And so gather that checklist, and then observe how, the clients are the staff's using the network during that doing that process, because that'll help you understand when you can do an outage window, right? So when we're looking for outage windows and you've got to implement some changes and whatnot, you need to kind of understand is, okay, when should I do that change, right? I'm sure Dev and Aaron and even Grant, I'm sure we're no strangers to outage windows documentation, right? Sometimes it takes us like half an hour to an hour to fill out change orders, right? But it's always good to kind of get the business on your side. So one of the things that I like to kind of highlight in my experience is, if you're going to do some remediation plans and build up that plan base, always talk to the staff, find out the department heads when's a good time to do an outage, and to kind of implement some changes. And also, work with the teams and kind of say, okay, we're going to take out this Wi-Fi, this area, or whatever it is. We're going to take it down for a certain amount of time, but you'll have it up in the morning, and over communicate, because in that way you'll have them on your side. And that way you can actually identify and triage those things at any of those changes that you made. So it's always important to have a really good checklist of, well, these are the things I'm going to do, and these are the things we've highlighted to actually make that change, and then put them into your change windows. And to our guests, I mean, you probably have gone through this, right? I mean, what's some of your experiences on kind of that change window process?
So I can take that up. Yes, I think you're bang on that point, Stu. It's like, as engineers, we make so many improvements to our network, and take a scenario where you want to go back end of the year and see what are those changes that you've made. To even get it as a learning, it's so difficult. It's so difficult to see those changes that you've made that might have had some great improvements on your network. That's from your personal perspective, but when you're especially working in an environment where change process is so important, you can't miss this, because you have to justify what's that impact on doing that change during the business hour, and that has to be tested. So in your change management process, we also have things like your testing what you're going to do, and if you're going to see that improvement, and also trying to see if it's not impacting any clients, especially if you're doing those changes during business hours. So test. It's very important that you test the change that you're making, ensure that it's not impacting the clients if you're doing it during business hours. And most of the times we do those changes after hours for this reason, because some changes really disrupt that client connectivity, right? And it disassociates and then associates back. But still, it's good to have that captured in the change and set the expectations right, that we are going to perform this change, and this is the expected outage, so that everybody is prepared and you're covered.
And I think try to make minor changes, right? Nothing too drastic, and kind of step your way through it. But if you feel comfortable in a number of changes, then at least you've documented, right? I think that's really important. You highlight that, document the process, and then that way you can back out of it if you need to. And I think that's something that is definitely, when you're optimizing, you want to make sure you keep a good track of what you've done, and say, okay, take some screenshots or whatever it is you need to do, back up your config files is probably even the best one to do, and then re-implement those back out of those changes, and then create a plan as how long would it take me to back out of the change, right? We'll get into a little bit more of that in a moment on some use cases. But Grant, any final thoughts here?
I'm sorry, I've been diligently reading and addressing some of the questions that are coming through in the Q&A, and there's a lot of good stuff coming through.
Excellent.
In the chat as well, which is really, really good. Mike made a really good point, about, downtime, in relation to downtime, that you've got to be clear about the benefit to the stakeholder, and, quote, the downtime, it stinks, but
Yes.
We're going to improve your experience, right? And I think that's a really critical point, to make it super clear, because the stakeholders aren't going to understand, right? It's like there's going to be an impact to the network, there's an outage, what is the outcome going to be, right? So, some really good stuff there. Lots of discussion around KVR with Apple products, Stu. So I think you've opened up Pandora's box there.
Yeah, oh, that's good. I was hoping that one of our fellow, I guess, patriotic listeners out there, I think Keith. I was hoping for Keith to correct me on that one, but I think it was good, because I like seeing it when the manufacturers are starting to pay more attention to how Wi-Fi is working and how we're actually making it better, right? And so it's not about just, okay, well, we've created a great card, it's capable of X, but did you support all the cool stuff that the vendors are putting out, right? Yeah. So it's I think it's really cool, and I think I see better things on the horizon, right? We can only make Wi-Fi better if we work as a community and get our vendors involved.
Yeah.
And I should probably have left that as a final thought, because I really miss Tawny at this point. I'm going to put it out on a limb here, folks, that I really miss Tawny because this is the time that we kind of go back and forth, and I do appreciate this kind of talk, Grant, and with our guests here, because it's this is where we pivot, right, and we kind of want to understand is that we got a lot of cool topic and of information to go through, but we're going to go through a little bit of some use cases, but of course in true fashion we have to go through another poll question. I'm going to go and launch the second poll here for you guys, but we really kind of want to know what your thoughts are here, right? Is which of the following describes your optimization plan based on what we're talking about. So I'm going to open up the polls there, and so you can go through. But I really like I really like the answers on this one. There's like the choices, I should say. What do you gents think? You like some of the choices here? I know there's one that definitely stands out to me.
Option D there, Stu.
Right? and of course, I've got to get the Jeopardy music in the background, but I don't know if it actually shows. You can hear it on the monitor speakers, but that's you can hear it. Yeah, sometimes it gets loud. I did listen to kind of one of our YouTube captured videos, and they can't quite hear it, but I think they filtered out so we don't get any copyright stuff. But I think this one's free to play. So with that, it's great to see some folks still throwing up they are actually, they're still voting there. I'm dealing with a couple of different screens today. And one of them is actually the poll in progress. So, so here we go. I'm going to go ahead and end that there. We have a number of people still voting. Come on, folks. There we go. I'll close it off there. And let's take a look at that. Let's share the results with the folks there. Now, not everybody voted on this one. There's a lot of outstanding votes, but we said, you know what, let's give us a good thing. It's both proactive and okay, that's interesting. Okay, so that's some interesting results, wouldn't you say, folks?
I was not expecting that. I was expecting more reactive, but
right?
Given how the first polling question went as well, I guess I was expecting different answers there too.
Yeah.
So it kind of shows some of the audience who is attracted to this webinar is a lot more proactive sort of fit, a lot more proactive work going on, which is kind of what we kind of want people to do, right? So make sure your network, it's a health check idea.
Yeah, and I think that's yeah. I mean,
maybe they're optimistic engineers, Aaron. Maybe they're like, well, I'm really reactive, but I've got this proactive and reactive option. So I'm gonna be proactive now.
Yeah, right? Now I'm gonna.
Yeah, it's the answers we want.
Right? Yeah. I was really hoping for D. I really was, because there are. I gotta say, I have come across environments where I will just wait for someone to say something. And it's like, that's the wrong way. That's the wrong answer, right? Is you want to know what the potential problems is before I was just say the users, but the clients complain, right? Or put in a ticket. So because you want to make sure that it's working. So as we move along on that one, I'm going to stop sharing the polls there. And as we get into kind of use cases, we've talked a lot about things that we're doing here. We talked about how we're going to go look for things like we talked about checking to make sure our SSIDs are broadcasting on a regular basis, because sometimes in certain modes, sometimes in my experience, Flex Connect, it's on and then it's off, right? Sometimes it just didn't work. Or maybe in another environment where you've got an AP, it's in a group, it just seems it didn't get its config pushed, right? Because that never happens, right? So it does it, and so those are things. It's always good to kind of go out and make sure that those are they're up and running. Would you folks agree on that, or maybe share some of your kind of use case experiences there? I know we covered a lot of it.
Stu, I've got some questions here that might be able to sort of jump into this.
Get into that. Oh, I love it.
Kind of
yes.
Try not to fall too much into troubleshooting and more into optimization, but we'll see how we go here.
Yeah.
So Dev was talking before about MacBook and the challenges that they might face compared to, let's say, like a Windows client.
Mm-hmm.
And so someone's actually sort of said, is there anything we can tweak on the MacBook NIC? So I know, I know that's a,
I wish.
Yeah, right. What I would boil it down to is, Dev, you've had a bit of experience with, with some onboarding of Apple product onto your networks, and maybe Aaron, you've seen this, with customers and with field work as well. So, any tips or anything that you guys have seen that's made that process a little bit easier, a little bit more streamlined?
I think you have different flavors in the Apple products, right? Like you have a lot of best practices available out there for your iOS devices, or iOS or iPad OS. And the roaming experience on those devices can really improve with the protocols that you have both on the vendor side and the client side, like your 802.11r, KV, and all that. But MacBooks are a little different, right? MacBooks are not designed to roam. And if the user is expecting that I want a good roaming experience on a MacBook, that's not going to happen. It's not going to be it's not going to be good, because the protocols don't support. No matter what protocols you enable on your vendor side, the device doesn't understand that. So you really need to have that expectation. But what I would like to say is, from the recent learning, it's that you design your network for all flavors. For example, it again comes back to design, where you are factoring in that offset of MacBook Pros, where you are designing not -67 on your site survey tool, or say Sidekick, but you're taking that offset. If you have seen 8 dBs or 5 dB or 10 dB, whatever that number is, put some buffer and design it for NIC 60 on your Sidekick, on your Survey Pro. By doing that, you are giving a chance for the device to have better signal reception, and also giving it a chance in those cell edges, and giving it a chance to connect to the network. I've seen some areas where it's showing -69 RSSI on my iPhone, and on my MacBook, it's not connecting at all. The association is just failing. So it goes back to your design, to have that buffer in your design, and try to ensure that you're helping those clients connect to the network.
And that really kind of segues into that next slide of ours, right? Is that bridging the gap? You're talking about how you're optimizing it, but then it may end up becoming that troubleshooting experience, right? And just before we touch on that, one of the comments in the chat there kind of really highlights it, is that it's that there's a you're just, when you're right, is when you're designing your network, you want to make sure that you're designing it for devices to do as they are intended. But you can't really I mean, the thing is that everything's different, right? Every device is going to be different. You're going to have to try to go with the flows of making sure everyone comes to the party and everyone plays nicely, right? Or everyone comes to the dance and everyone gets a dance partner, so to speak, because we want to make sure that as you're on that Wi-Fi network, you're working well. You can't specifically try to get all Wi-Fi devices efficient, but we can try, right? We wish they would all do it, but bridging the gap. I mean, we lead into that optimization. At what point does that optimization become troubleshooting, right? We talked about that earlier, is that it's, and Aaron, you brought up some good points, is that, you could sit there and optimize it, but then it's like, oh, I've uncovered an issue where the channels aren't changing, even though they should be. And maybe this is where that comes into that, that car servicing, we talked about it earlier, that oil change, right? That's where that optimization, and then we get to troubleshooting. We take it a little bit further.
Yeah, so definitely. That optimize definitely dovetails into troubleshooting a lot of the time. Most people think, oh, I just got to go and fix something, and that's not necessarily optimizing. That tends to be more troubleshooting. It's that, yeah, I'm getting that service done on my car. and maybe they find something. They always find something in your car service that costs you more money, right? So yeah, you get that oil change and tweaks and tune-ups to your network, and then you could very well, in that investigation and talking to the stakeholders, talking to the boots on the ground there, and find that there are things that aren't being reported, which could lead you down that rabbit hole of, right, now I've got to go and do some troubleshooting, and there could be more changes that need to be made, which again will impact that sort of planning of your outage windows again.
Exactly. It's like that, you know, you kind of enhanced improvement, right? The troubleshooting, right? It is what it is. You really get into kind of, okay, now how much time do I need to spend on that to kind of fix things? You know, there's something squeaking in there. What do I need to look at, right? Dev, what are your thoughts there? You know, just from a troubleshooting perspective, right? It's like we're optimizing, but you know, leading into that troubleshooting, it's, you know, that now it's you have to kind of take as what do you classify as optimize and go into troubleshooting?
I think you know, even from the past experience, you get called when it's really critical, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because let's get it, you know, most of the people would agree that not every time you have a chance to design your network the way you want to. Everybody wants to, but sometimes you might walk into a situation where the network was designed, say, 3 years back, and you have done whatever best practices you can put in. But when you have those escalations, or when you get an opportunity to troubleshoot from a different environment, because somebody is losing hundreds and thousands of dollars, that's when you get that real opportunity to spend time and identify you know, what's actually happening. And I think that gives a chance for you to go through what's actually happening and gives you an opportunity to optimize your network based on those findings from the troubleshooting that you have done, which not only helps you to fix that issue that you have been called for, but also you'll say that, hey, I noticed 4 other things that can be tested and then implemented. And then it gives you that opportunity to optimize it better when you've done that deep troubleshooting.
Right. Yeah. Because you could come into even a client bug, right? It could be the bug right with the driver, and it's only affecting a certain group of devices, right? And it's and this is where it's like, okay, now it becomes a full troubleshooting exercise, right? It was optimize was part of the you know, percentage of the things that we needed to look at, but then that leads into troubleshooting. But it comes into, you know, that favorite saying, right? It depends. It depends, yeah. Right? It's always going to depend, and we look at that because we have to say that because, you know, when I look at that optimization, it's like, great, that's good, but it's going to depend on, okay, well, hey, is this really a troubleshooting now, or is this an optimized session or troubleshooting? So it's really important that these two are kind of tied into each other, so that you can get into that process. And on the troubleshooting side, that's, you know, that'll be a topic for another webinar for sure. Is where you can go in really in depth, right? Is how do you approach that troubleshooting metric? How do you go into approach that? But it depends.
Well, the graphics, sorry, Stu, the graphic, you know, up in the top right, sort of addressing that as well. You know, we've got optimization. It can lead into troubleshooting. We're going to fix the issue, and then we're going to sort of go back to optimization, right? So, you know, if we do the health check, what did we find? Is there any deeper level stuff that we need to look at, right? Is there anything that's broken on the vehicle that we need to fix? And, you know, we'll sort of go from there.
And I think in this point, when you're troubleshooting, most of the times we all might have experienced this, where people are complaining that they are having issues with their device when they're connecting. And recreating that problem is so important. And most of the times when we troubleshoot, you know, it takes a very long time to actually reproduce that issue, replicate that issue. And, you know, because you want to get those logs from that particular instance, right? And it's so important. And it's almost like, you know, fishing, where you're literally waiting to see when you can reproduce those issues so that you can get those logs, be it from from your survey tool or be it from your debugs to identify what's happening.
Absolutely. Aaron, any final thoughts here on this one? Any final thoughts? Or I guess actually we're getting close to the end of our webinar, and I think this is our kind of our last, this is our last slide. But is, what are your kind of overall final thoughts, not just on bridging the gap, but in the overall itself in the optimization process? What do you think? What do you think there, Aaron?
I think it's an important step that a lot of people tend to forget. They think of deployment and troubleshoot and forget about the optimize step in the middle, which tends to just lead to a bigger troubleshooting step. A lot of that optimization can be to take away those little niggling little things. But it's like, again, it's that car service sort of analogy. If I get my car service regularly, I'm not going to break down on the highway. It tends to be how things play out. And so the optimize step for me is very important, getting people to survey a bit more regularly. And again, there's been a couple of questions, Sharp, about how often should you survey? And in my experience, it comes down to how mission critical the Wi-Fi is. The more mission critical it is, the more often you're going to survey to stay on top of that optimization part of the life cycle, and try and reduce the amount you're spending in troubleshooting, because troubleshooting can be expensive. Like that whole process of greater downtime, if it's mission critical, network's going to be offline while I do more troubleshooting, as opposed to those tiny little tweaks and tunes that I can make that maybe don't need the network to go down for that optimized step. So I think it's a critical part of that life cycle. And if you want your network to run well for a long period of time, I think it's more important, can be more important than troubleshooting. If you stay on top of optimize, less troubleshooting.
That's great. And Dev, what do you think? There's your final thoughts, the overall.
No, completely agree with that. I think in a real world, it's very difficult to optimize your network always. As Aaron said, it really depends on how mission critical your network is, right? But I think some people learn from optimize. It's like what you have learned and what you want to do for rest as a practice. Like some people optimize their network and they hear less complaints and they know what has led to that experience. And some people realize that after troubleshooting, they have optimized and that has improved their network. So it's really that learning experience that we should take and try to make it a practice as network engineers, wireless engineers, to make it a practice to go back and assess what's out there after a year of deploying or 2 years of deploying, so that you know that something has changed. And the good thing about the optimize is, the word optimize is small, but it's really getting the best out of anything, right? Optimize is basically getting the best out of anything. So you want the best out of the Wi-Fi that you want, and to do that, it really ticks a lot of boxes. Like if you want to optimize, you have to do your survey and you have to do your client device testing. You have to also check how your Wi-Fi infrastructure is responding to those clients. So it's a small word, but you have a lot of work involved in optimizing your network correctly if you're doing it as a practice regularly. And I think based on that criticality of the service that you're offering, you can prioritize how often you have to go and perform those checks.
Absolutely. Grant, what do you think there? What's your final thoughts?
I think Aaron and Dev have covered, quite a bit of it. And I do really like the cars servicing and, like the oil change and getting something fixed analogy. As we're going through that optimization process, there can be a bit of a thin line before it falls into troubleshooting. I've been combing through the chat and the Q&A, and a lot of people are actually saying like, troubleshoot this, troubleshoot that, right? So which just sort of speaks to the point of, and what you've alluded to, Stu, let's have a troubleshooting webinar. I know you sort of talked about it.
Absolutely, yeah.
I think that, I think that that's going to
But yeah, and I think you hit it right there. Is that if you've noticed the common theme in our webinars this year is that we kicked off in January, is we started right out from the design and the validation. We spent some time validating there, and then we pivoted into just I think we did before the design, we pivoted back into some antenna design as well. But which was really cool here is that we're keeping on a common theme and through the entire life cycle process, right? Is like, what do we do next? How do we get into these environments? It's always good is when we look at the optimized troubleshoot for me is not all, you want a kind of a third party approach to understanding if your network is doing what it's supposed to be doing. So your NMS platform, your controllers could be telling you one thing, and we hope that they're telling us as much information as we can. But what you need is something to read the actual the energy coming from the APs. You need to see how they're actually being seen on the floor plan within that environment. So that's where it really comes into play is getting the right tools out there to do that. So as we kind of wrap up, the whole session is. As we're going to leave up our Q&A slide, our questions. If you do have any questions for our folks, their contact information is here on the screen. And I really, Grant, I know we really appreciate, our folks joining us for today, and of course our guests who are already in the future, and it is early morning for them. And I really do appreciate you guys coming on this morning. It really had actually a lot of fun here today. With that, I will throw up I'll leave that up there just for a second. And we've got, I think, Grant, just before we end off here. If you folks are looking to be on a webinar, here's your chance. If you actually want to join myself, Tawny, and Grant, and if to get on there, we do have a call for speakers. So we are looking into the future, into later the year. So if you are looking for getting submit an idea, come on up, submit an idea, and we'd be happy to reach out and talk to you. So with that, I would like to kind of bringing the webinar to an end, and we'll go through. I just want to say thank you very much for everyone for joining today.
Yeah, thanks, Stu. I was actually going to say with that previous slide and the call for speakers, I mean, there's some really chatty folk in the in the chat right now. So
yeah, if you've got an idea,
let's just drop them in the webinar sometimes.
Absolutely.
Lots of really good discussion.
All right.